The number appears on a Tuesday. No confetti, no phone call, just a banking app refreshed out of habit showing a balance that starts with a 1 and ends with 6 zeros. You stare at it for a second longer than usual. Then you close the app, finish your coffee, and go to work. That's it. That's the whole scene. No champagne, no new car in the driveway, no announcement to family. Just a quiet Tuesday morning and a number that took years to build, sitting silently in an account nobody else can see. This is the story of what it actually feels like to cross $1 million. Not the fantasy, not the highlight reel, but the real psychological and emotional experience of it. This video is going to walk you through it, step by step, decision by decision. The version nobody posts about because it doesn't look like anything at all. We're going to talk about the years before the number, the specific mindset shift that happens the moment you realize you don't have to prove anything to anyone, and the strange, quiet discomfort that shows up right alongside the relief, the part almost nobody warns you about. Because reaching $1 million doesn't rewire who you are, it reveals who you already were. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the people who build real wealth almost never look like they have it, and why that might be the smartest financial decision they ever made. Let's go back to where it actually starts, not with the million, with the version of you that had nothing close to it. Picture a one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, a desk in the corner that used to be a dining table. A laptop with a cracked corner from being dropped twice. This is where it begins, not with some grand vision of wealth, but with a simple, almost boring decision to spend less than you earn and to do something useful with the difference. There's no dramatic turning point here, no lottery ticket, no inheritance, just a person who got tired of watching their paycheck disappear into things they couldn't remember buying a month later. The first year, the number in the savings account is embarrassing, $2,400. It took 11 months to get there, and half of it went right back out the door for a car repair nobody saw coming. But something had shifted, not the amount, the habit. Because here's what almost nobody tells you about the road to $1 million. It is never one big decision. It's hundreds of small, unremarkable ones repeated so many times they eventually stop feeling like decisions at all. Skip the upgrade, automate the transfer, say no to the dinner you can't really afford, say yes to the boring index fund instead of the exciting stock everyone's talking about at the office. None of it feels like anything in the moment. That's exactly why it works. By year 3, the retirement account crosses $30,000. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like nothing changed at all. The apartment is the same, the car is the same, the Friday nights are mostly the same. But the architecture underneath is shifting, quietly, invisibly, the way a foundation gets poured months before anyone sees a building rise above it. This is the part of the story people skip when they talk about wealth. They want the ending. They want the number. But the number is just the visible tip of something built entirely out of sight, one unremarkable Tuesday at a time. And that quiet, invisible architecture is exactly what's about to be tested, because the next few years are where the real story begins. So what do you actually do with that quiet, strange moment once it arrives? This is where the real lessons live, not in the number itself, but in what it teaches you about money, identity, and behavior. Lesson 1. The goalpost moves, and that's not failure. That's human nature. Almost everyone who crosses $1 million describes some version of the same thing. Within weeks, the mind quietly resets the target. Suddenly, $1 million doesn't feel like enough. It feels like a new baseline. $2 million starts to feel like the real number. This isn't greed, it's a well-documented psychological pattern called the hedonic treadmill, and it applies to money just as much as it applies to material things. The mistake most people make is thinking this means they haven't achieved anything. The correct read is different. The goalpost moving is proof the achievement was real. The brain doesn't recalibrate around numbers that don't matter. The strategy successful long-term investors use here is not to chase the new goalpost emotionally, it's to notice the shift, name it out loud, and consciously decide whether the next target is coming from genuine planning or just an unconscious habit of never letting yourself feel satisfied. Lesson 2. Lifestyle inflation is the single biggest threat after the million, not before it. Here's a mistake that quietly destroys more new millionaires than any bad investment ever could. The temptation, right after crossing a big number, is to finally reward yourself. A nicer car, a bigger house, a lifestyle upgrade that matches the number on paper. The common approach, treat the milestone as permission to increase spending. The successful approach, treat the milestone as proof that the system works and leave the system exactly as it is. Because $1 million invested and left alone can continue compounding for decades. $1 million partially converted into a depreciating lifestyle, a bigger mortgage, a leased car, a higher fixed cost of living, stops compounding the moment it's spent, and now requires ongoing income to sustain the new baseline forever. This is the exact fork Warren Buffett has talked about publicly for decades. It's not what you earn, it's what you keep and what you allow to keep growing. Lesson 3. Money doesn't fix identity problems, it reveals them. This is the psychological insight almost nobody talks about openly. If someone struggled with self-worth before the million, that struggle typically doesn't disappear after the million. It just loses its most convenient excuse. Financial therapists and behavioral researchers have observed this pattern repeatedly. People expect a number to change how they feel about themselves, and when it doesn't, it can actually trigger a strange identity crisis, a quiet unraveling of, if this doesn't make me feel different, what will? The people who navigate this well are the ones who did the internal work before the number arrived, who built self-worth on things other than net worth, so that when the milestone hit, it was simply confirmation of a life already going well, not a rescue mission for a life that wasn't. Lesson 4. Staying quiet about wealth is a strategy, not a personality trait. This connects directly to something touched on earlier, the version of this person who still drives the same car, lives in the same neighborhood, keeps the same friendships. That's not modesty for its own sake, it's protective. The moment people around you know the number, the dynamic changes. Conversations shift, requests appear, relationships that were built on shared circumstances start quietly renegotiating themselves around the new information. Staying visible costs something that has nothing to do with money. It costs you the ability to move through your own life without being seen as an opportunity. And the real transformation isn't the money itself, it's the relationship with time. This might be the most valuable lesson in the entire story. Once the compounding engine is running and the number crosses a meaningful threshold, something shifts in how a person relates to their own future. There's less urgency, less desperation in financial decisions, more room to think in years instead of paychecks. That shift from scarcity thinking to patience is worth more than the $1 million itself, because it's the thing that allows the next million and the one after that to arrive with even less effort than the first. The common mistake people make is believing wealth is primarily about access to things, to experiences, to status. The successful mindset treats wealth as primarily about option value, the ability to say no to things that don't serve you without financial fear making that decision for you. That's the actual prize, not the number on the screen, the quiet, expanded set of choices sitting behind it. So let's go back to that Tuesday morning, the coffee going cold, the banking app closed, the commute waiting outside the door. Nothing about that scene looks like the ending of a success story. And that's exactly the point. The $1 million was never going to announce itself with fireworks because it was never built through a single dramatic moment. It was built through thousands of small, boring, repeated decisions, the kind that don't make for exciting stories, the kind nobody puts in a highlight reel, the kind that only revealed their power decades later, quietly, all at once. If there's one thing worth taking from this story, it's this. The version of wealth that lasts is almost never the version that gets celebrated. It's the version that goes unnoticed for years because it's too busy compounding to make noise. The real transformation isn't the number in the account. It's the person who was willing to keep making unremarkable decisions long after they stopped feeling exciting. The person who automated the hard choices so willpower never had to carry the weight alone. The person who understood eventually that the goalpost would always try to move and chose to stay grounded anyway. That's the wealth code. Not a secret, not a shortcut, just patience, systems, and the willingness to look exactly the same on the outside while everything changes on the inside. Wherever you are on that road right now, whether you're at $2,400 like that very first year, or $180,000, or somewhere just starting to compound in the background, the story is the same story. It just hasn't reached its quiet Tuesday morning yet.
There's a question that tends to surface around this stage of the journey, usually late at night, usually unprompted by anything specific. Does any of this actually matter if no one around you knows about it? It's worth answering honestly because it's not a small question. Humans are wired for recognition. For most of history, status and survival were linked. Being seen as capable, resourceful, successful within a tribe meant protection, access, belonging. So there's nothing broken about wanting the number to mean something to someone else. That instinct is old and it's human. But here's what tends to happen to the people who chase that recognition directly. The moment wealth becomes about being seen, it starts requiring an audience to feel real, and an audience is an unreliable foundation because it's external. It depends on other people noticing, validating, reacting. The day they stop reacting, and eventually they always do, the whole structure of "does this matter" collapses along with it. The people who build wealth that actually lasts tend to solve this differently. They find a smaller, quieter form of recognition that doesn't depend on a crowd. A single spreadsheet, updated privately, showing 11 years of consistent progress. A conversation with one trusted person, a spouse, a close friend, a parent who understands exactly what it took to get here, even if no one else ever will. That's often enough. It doesn't need to be public to be real. There's a related insight worth adding here because it changes how a lot of people think about the entire journey. The version of you that reaches the million isn't a different person than the version that started with $2,400 in a savings account. It's the same person with the same habits, simply given enough time to compound. This matters because it removes the illusion that wealth requires some kind of personality transformation, some future upgraded version of yourself who finally has the discipline, the knowledge, the mindset to make it happen. That version doesn't need to be invented. The current version, doing the current unremarkable things consistently, is already capable of getting there. The only missing ingredient was ever time. This is also why the advice at the center of this entire story is almost frustratingly simple, and why so many people overlook it while searching for something more complicated. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference into something that grows automatically, and let a decade or two of consistency do what no single decision ever could. It won't feel like progress most days. It will feel, for long stretches, like absolutely nothing is happening at all. And then, on some ordinary Tuesday morning that looks exactly like every other morning before it, it won't be nothing anymore. That's the part worth remembering long after this video ends. Not the number, and not the moment it arrived, but the quiet, unglamorous decade that made the moment possible in the first place. There's one more layer to this story worth sitting with. The part that happens years after the Tuesday morning, once the initial quiet has settled into something like a new normal. Because here's what almost nobody tells you. Crossing the million isn't the test. Staying grounded for the next 10 years after crossing it, that's the actual test. Picture 5 years further down the road. The number hasn't just held, it's grown, quietly, the same way it always did, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing dramatic happened. The same contributions, the same unglamorous index funds, the same modest apartment, now maybe traded for a modest house,
bought with cash, saved the same slow way everything else was saved. And somewhere in those 5 years, a strange kind of test shows up. Not a market crash, not a financial emergency. Something quieter and in some ways harder to navigate. Boredom with the system that built everything. This is the point where a lot of people who reach the million start making their first real mistakes. Not because they lack discipline. Discipline is exactly what got them here. But because discipline, without a clear why behind it, starts to feel pointless once the initial goal is behind them. The temptation shows up in small, reasonable-sounding disguises. A slightly riskier investment, just to make things interesting again. A slightly bigger purchase, justified as, I've earned it by now. A slow, almost invisible drift away from the exact behaviors that built the wealth in the first place. The people who avoid this trap tend to do one specific thing differently. They replace the original goal with a new one before boredom has the chance to write a worse one for them. Not a bigger number for its own sake, but a genuine purpose for the wealth, funding a child's education without debt, reaching a specific age of full financial independence, building something that outlasts them entirely. Wealth without a why attached to it tends to either stagnate or get spent chasing a feeling that never really was about money in the first place. Wealth with a clear why tends to keep compounding, quietly, for another decade, and then another, because the system built to reach the first goal simply gets pointed at the next one. This is really the final piece of the wealth code. The $1 million was never actually the destination. It was proof that the system worked. The real work, the part that separates people who build lasting wealth from people who briefly touch it and lose it again, is what happens in the quiet years afterward, when there's no more milestone left to chase, and the only thing left to do is decide, on purpose, what all of it was actually for. That decision, made deliberately instead of by accident, is the difference between a number that eventually fades back to zero and a number that becomes a legacy.
If this video gave you a new way to think about money, do us a favor and hit subscribe.